Today on the show, we're going to talk about how the US election is likely affecting your consulting business without you even knowing. My name is Russell Pearson, and for the last 30 years, I've been working in the areas of sales, marketing, and consulting, specifically for helping consultants grow their consulting practices. The good thing about being in this business for as long as I have means that I've been able to see trends over the years. And for the last 30 years, I've seen a regular trend happen every 4 years, and it's not the Olympic Games. It's the US election and its effect on global business, which means that it often affects how consultants are actually winning work or how consultants are not winning work. Now, there are all sorts of things you can do to prevent it from happening, and there's lots of ways that you can see if it is happening for you, and today we're going to talk about that subject. So the first thing I want to talk about is the archetype of a US election. Now, Ray Dalio, who is a financial wizard, has come out in his book talking about how he created archetypes for things like recessions and depressions, and you can actually see how a recession looks as far as how it acts. How is the financial world acting? How is society acting? And being able to identify, are we about to have a recession based off certain criteria? Now, he's been able to identify that through archetypal formats, but the same thing happens when a US election is declared. Now, a US election tends to be around November, and it usually starts about this time of year. And obviously, it started probably a month ago, maybe a little earlier than that, but it depends on the candidates and the current race. Now, each time there's been a new election, there has always been a bit of uncertainty around this time of year. And that uncertainty affects all sorts of individuals, but particularly governments, especially when there's a US election, because of the influence, whether that be right or wrong, that a US election has on a lot of the global economy. There is a situation where governments tend to hold a little bit to see what happens. Now, that has a flow-on effect. So, number one, you might be a consultant who's working with government, and you might be finding that people are holding in a lot of those long-term projects that you're wanting to have. Now, for those people who are working with people who work with government, so you might be working with infrastructure or medical or any other things that are supported by government, you will find that that same idea is flowing downhill. So infrastructure projects can often be slowed during this period of time, which means consulting for those infrastructure projects has the same effect as well. And it keeps dripping on down. Now, what happens with that is that if it starts early enough, and it's probably much earlier in the year, probably much more around the February and even March period, that you see the slowing in those government pieces, that by the time it actually flows through to small business, it's around this time of year that people are now going, I don't know if I can spend the money now because I'm uncertain about what's going on in the market. And so there are a lot of consultants who will look at the market and blame the market for what's going on. They're saying there's no work in the market, or the market is currently slowed or on a downturn. And while that can be true in different financial lenses, what I'm talking about is that often it's not a slowing down of the market, it's an uncertainty in the market, so they buy differently. And that's what I want to talk about today, about how you can identify how your clients are buying differently. So number one is to identify the archetypes that are happening, how moments of change and moments of flux can actually influence the way we need to do business. So one of those archetypes is a US election. Another archetype will be end of financial year, or even like Christmas, end of, or the change of the calendar year. And depending on where you are in the world, you will have a different end of financial year. Now in Australia, tends to be the end of June and the new financial year starting in July. For others, it'll be the calendar year. For others, it'll be in April. So it depends on where you are in the world, but based off who you're working with in the world, so you might have a company in Sweden, but you're working globally, have a look at where the clients are, because that end of financial year will actually affect their decision making, their budgeting, and their business decision making abilities, right? So what do we do when there's a lot of things going on, where there's a lot of change happening, when we see a US election that's going to affect potentially government policy, government decisions, when we see even an election within our own area, our own economy, or within our own country? How is that going to affect what we're going to do? Well, it's usually a case that people will slow down their decision making on long-term projects. So it's usually that. So if you are working at a strategic level and you're helping people change from here to here, pretty much any change project, you may find that there is some slowing around that. Now, that doesn't mean you should change what you do instantly. Ideally, you want to understand from your market, from the specific clients you're working with, if it's having an effect on them. Now, you don't have to ask, you just need to ask them about their long-term plans and about whether they have a priority to put those things into practice. Now, if you find that they don't have a priority or they're talking to you, ideally you want to have these honest and open conversations with your clients. If you can get that honest and open conversation, you can find out whether, well, management right now is holding fire until this, for this reason, whatever it might be. And you can then start going, all right, well, if we're holding fire on some of these bigger projects or some of these long-term change projects, where should I be focusing right now? And where you should be focusing right now is looking down to the decision maker that you've got in front of you and saying, what is filling their plate right now and what would they like to remove? There'll be much smaller projects. There'll be little pieces that you can help them with to enable their general day-to-day processes and situation to be better. So this happened very much during the global economic crisis. It also happened very much during COVID, is that when COVID happened, a lot of the change projects were sort of thrown out the window, but people could look right now at how they could fix the current things that were happening around them. So for instance, within the business coaching world, instead of looking at how we can help someone grow their business because they were struggling to get new clients some of the time, obviously we could help in many ways to benefit them there and help them grow. But what we also did is, because of scarcity and because of the fear that was happening around them, is we helped them keep their cash flow. And so rather than looking at growth first, we actually looked at how we can make sure there is money in the bank so that you can feel much more confident about what's going on in your business. And so we put receivables processes in, we put all sorts of things in place for small businesses so that they could feel more confident about their current situation. So think about your client. What is the short-term focus that they would like to do? What are the smaller fixes so they can feel more confident about their current position before they can get back to working on some of these much longer-term projects? So what we're really talking about is taking big offers and making them much smaller. Now, that means that your $80,000 projects might not be the things getting off the ground, but you can do a lot more smaller, maybe $5,000, $6,000 projects with a lot more clients, so that when you come out of this uncertain period, you've got a lot more clients to work with because you're now the incumbent consultant that they're working with, rather than your limitation of only being able to work with maybe 5 or 6 clients at a time. So the key for all of this is make sure you're speaking to clients. You know, one of the funny things that happened during COVID is I spoke to a lot of my clients who said, I'm pulling back from speaking to people because they're too busy, they don't want to speak to me. But the reality is, when I asked them when did they say that, they hadn't said it, it was just in their minds. And what I found is that people really appreciated you reaching out to them, even though they might have not had an opportunity to work with you right now. It was enabled you to really build rapport. What happens during what people perceive as a downturn or one of these archetypal changes to the environment is that if the consultants don't find that there is money to be made, a lot of them won't continue to speak to their clients. It's a massive mistake because it enables you to get in there and speak to their clients while no one else is speaking to them. So speak to these clients more. Have more conversations that are not about closing a piece of work or a project, but about what's happening in their day-to-day and what are the smaller symptomatic issues that you may be able to take care of. So the other thing that happens around this same time of year is that as we move towards November, every time that there is an election, either within our country or within the US, it really does have a lot of influence. And I just want to say, I have no dog in this race. I don't mind which way it goes. I'm in Australia here. It's probably not going to affect me. I'm not going to talk about the political side of things today, so we'll put that one to the side. If you want to talk about it in the comments, you absolutely can, but that's not the purpose of today's situation. The purpose of today's episode is to actually help you with navigating the waters of these current situations. So with the race through to November, what happens is there is a lot more political spending in the advertising area. There is a lot more political spending in the press release, in the exposure area, which means that political stories are stealing a lot of the air around the news cycle. They're also stealing a lot of the air around the advertising cycle, which means the advertising costs go up. Now, if you are working with advertising in any sense, whether it be, let's say, LinkedIn ads or Google ads or Facebook ads, then you're going to find during this period of time that it is very likely that the ad costs will rise. Now, they will go down again, but it is pretty normal during this period to see that happen because there's just more competition. There's more fish, more sharks in the water. It becomes a real red ocean when it comes to advertising. Now, the same thing can happen with, obviously, mindshare. So mindshare is the concept of what am I currently thinking about right now? The election steals attention. And even if it's just water cooler attention, it becomes that other thing. So I'll give you an example. There's a lot of television shows that become the water cooler conversation. And during a time that's not in an election, you'll find those water cooler conversations are happening a lot more because a lot of more people are watching that sort of television. You'll find during the head towards November that a lot of people will start watching a lot more of the news coverage for things like what's incredibly happening within the US political cycle from a day-to-day basis. And so what does that mean for you as a consultant? That means that their mind share is often on these external things. And so enabling you to bring them back to focus is a key area of concern. You want to make sure that you're not doing less, like I said before. You're not pulling back because you perceive that there's a lowering of the market. You want to be pushing more. You want to be out there in front of people having conversations more because, as I've said 100 times on this show, the fastest way for you to make a sale and to get a client, to acquire clients in general, is to have a conversation, because your point of sale is a conversation. Now, you might have a purchase order and you might actually send a proposal that gets signed off, but it's a conversation that happened that enabled you to do that. So having more of those conversations without necessarily the expectation of you closing work all the time is the price of doing business at that period of time. So we've got ad prices going up. So anyone who's doing advertising will notice that there's a higher cost there. Anyone who's not doing advertising but doing conversational sales, and we're going to do a lot more work on conversational sales going forward. Inside the Forge Business Program, we've got a whole program that's all about improving your conversational sales, but we're doubling down on that in August. So you may want to watch out for what we're doing there. But during this period of time, it is your opportunity to double down on your conversational activity. So speaking to more people more often, and ideally having a reason to speak to them. One of the things I've said a number of times on this channel is not just to call people to say, have you got work, have you got work, have you got work? It is about calling them to understand what's happening within their context right now. So context is king when it comes to designing how you will make an offer, to invite them to have a conversation about certain things. So right now, it may not be, and it could be, but it may not be the right time to be having a conversation about long-term change projects, but certainly a good time to be having a conversation about short-term execution projects where you can get something fixed for them, you can get something removed off their plate to give them more time and space to do their job much more effectively. So when advertising goes up, when exposure, especially that news exposure goes up, we need to find some other channels for us to have these conversations. Now, obviously, you can literally phone people and have a conversation that way, but one of the good ways that you can continue to have a conversation is through creating video series like this, that's right. You can email people, you can make sure you're doing that. You can provide them with really useful resources. Again, not looking to do big global change pieces, but much smaller pieces that they can action on a much smaller budget, things that they can say yes to on discretionary budgets, but finding ways to speak to them in multiple channels rather than relying on the same old opportunities is one of the things that you need to change during this time of change. So whether it's a US election or whether it's any change that's going on, understanding the context the conversations are happening for you and your clients is key to enabling you to get the most opportunity in your consulting business. So just to wrap up, the three things you really want to get clear on is understanding how to support your clients best, and that is by having conversations to understand what is really happening for them right now, what they can say yes to, and what they're likely to say no to, understanding the differences, whether it's because they've got a report person that they've got to speak to about getting more permissions, maybe budgets have tightened, maybe they need to have a different way of making a business case for people, but again, you're going to only get that through conversations. So the third point is be speaking to these opportunities, these prospects, these clients much more often than less right now, so that you can make sure that you are the first cab at the rank. So the US election can absolutely affect you if you let it, but if you follow what we've talked about today, you're going to find that there's much more opportunity in there for you and your clients. This has been episode number 93 of Your Consulting Business Podcast. My name's Russell Pearson. Until next time, stay passionate, and I'll catch you on the next one. Bye for now.